All right, good morning, everyone. Looks like we've got a pretty good group assembled here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Russell Cook. I'm the Information Systems Manager for the Silver State Health Insurance Exchange, and thank you very much for joining us for the September 10th monthly carrier meeting. This is a good one. We've been very busy. We have got a ton of things accomplished in the last month, and I can't wait to share some of the updates with you. But we are going to begin, as we always do, with a quick introduction. I know this is probably a familiar cast of characters, but we like to run through it anyway because our contact information is there as well. We are joined on the call today by Heather Korbulik. She's the Exchange's Executive Director. We also have Ryan High, our Chief Operations Officer. Myself, Russell Cook, as I mentioned, I'm the Information Systems Manager. We also have Eric Watt, Senior Project Manager for the transition, as well as Jamie Sawyer, SSHIX's Plan Certification Manager. And before we begin, just a couple of procedural things. Please, as always, keep your phones on mute unless you would like to raise a question by voice. We also have the option to raise a question by chat. You can do that using your Zoom meeting controls. Please keep in mind there is both a group chat as well as an individual chat feature. If you send a group chat, it will be visible to the group along with the name that you used to log in. Or you can send an individual chat directly to me, and it will only be visible to me. This month on our agenda, we're going to review some of the progress since last meeting, which is substantial. Can't wait to share that with you. We also wanted to give a quick update on the issuer agreement, as well as a couple of updates regarding testing during the month of September. First, we're going to discuss EDI Test Scenario 16, that's renewals, and that is next up in the queue for testing. And then later in the month, we are going to do our payment redirect testing. So I wanted to give you just a quick update and an overview of the progress to date there, because I believe there are at least a few of you out there who were still waiting on some information from regarding the IP addresses that we had asked you to whitelist and the security certificates that we had asked you to register. And then we're going to have an update on the data migration report. That's one of the most momentous accomplishments of the last month, is our consumer data migration. We'll tell you all about that. And then I wanted to finish off with an overview of our what we're calling our Carrier Connector Casework System. That's the system that we're developing to take the place of the SSHIX system that's currently used in collaboration with the healthcare.gov call center. We're developing the system to support not only collaborative casework investigation and consumer complaint resolution, but also to support our monthly reconciliation process and hopefully engineer email out of both of those processes as much as possible. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Progress since last meeting. I spoke briefly a moment ago about the consumer data migration, and that really is the biggest news of the last month. On August 15th, 66,132 active individual enrollments were migrated from healthcare.gov to the SBE platform. We've been talking for some time also about our goal to maintain existing designation relationships between consumers and their designated agents or brokers. And we are happy to report that agents and brokers who completed their Nevada HealthLink certification by the August 9th deadline were able to maintain their existing consumer designations. Why August 9th? Well, the consumer data migration was scheduled for August 15th, and so we had to get everyone in the system and certified before that date, before we imported the consumers, so that we could get consumers wired up to their designated enrollment professionals. So not every broker who had an existing designation, one or more existing designations through healthcare.gov, completed their certification by August 9th, but the majority did, and all those who did were able to maintain their existing designations. And I did want to report that as of today, we have received no confirmed reports of missing designations. And there's an asterisk there. We have received some concerns expressed by agents brokers who were expecting to find certain individuals listed in their book of business, and they did not find those individuals. But in every case, we were able to identify these consumers and their application and enrollment records in the migration payload that was sent to us by CMS at healthcare.gov. And we've been able able to confirm that none of these designations got lost as a result of a mistake with the import process. We found a number, the vast majority of the suspected omissions were due to the simple fact that no designation record was present through the FFN. We've been saying all along that the migration can only go as well as the quality of the source data, and it looks to us like the results of the consumer data migration as well as the redesignation process are 100% accurate, at least insofar as the accuracy of the data allowed. We did find some incidents where a designation had changed. A broker thought that they were the designated enrollment professional, and it turned out that the CMS records either specified a different agent or broker, or in some cases a navigator. We also found a few instances in which NPN number of the agent or broker in question had actually been mistyped in healthcare.gov. So when getting one of the numbers transposed is going to mean that we are not able to wire up that consumer to that enrollment professional based on their NPN number, because the NPN number in the application record was in error. However, we do have a fairly straightforward contingency plan, which is that these brokers can contact their consumers directly and request that these consumers go online after they claim their migrated account invitation and simply redesignate these brokers. And we've been watching that happen successfully in the platform, and so it looks to us like everything is working just the way that it should. So that's a big relief to us. So that was what was going on in the last 2 weeks of August, was getting the migration payload imported and getting the consumers with designated enrollment professionals, getting those relationships recreated in our platform. Then on September 4th, we sent out invitations to migrated consumers to claim their migrated user accounts and set up a username and password on the Nevada HealthLink platform. To date, 54,106 consumers have received email invitations. That's the number of those consumers who either had suggested email as their preferred communication method, or if they even had an email address on file, we sent them an email anyway. The remainder of consumers, and in addition to that remainder, those consumers who had chosen print mail as their primary, as their preferred communication method, those consumers received print mail invitations. So if you had an email address on file, you got both an email invitation as well as a print mail. If you had an email address on file, even if your preferred communication method was print mail, you still received an email communication invitation in addition to the print mail. The remainder of consumers who did not have an email address on file received print mail invitations only. So where does that leave us now? We have been watching things closely in the platform, and as of yesterday, we have received only 2 confirmed reports of discrepancies resulting from the data migration. These are consumers who received their invitation, they got an activation code along with that, they went to the platform, they input their activation code, and they received an error. Well, when they called the call center and we looked into it, we realized that both of these consumers had 2 separate application files, which were both marked as active in the CMS data migration payload. Now that is a little bit different than how we do things on the Nevada SBE platform. We have business rules in place that only allow a single active application at any given time. So Get Insured was able to come up with a solution. It did require a code change on the application, but they deployed that fix as a patch that went in the wee hours overnight last night. And these consumers should now be able to claim their migrated accounts. And by the way, our call center is reaching out to these consumers directly to assist them with the resolution, so we hope to have them taken care of today or tomorrow. And other than that, I am very happy to announce that everything appears to have gone according to plan. Again, we were only able, we were at the mercy of the quality of the data, but I think from my perspective, given the magnitude of what we were trying to achieve with this data migration, I think the quality of the data was exceptional. The months of homework that we put in ahead of time to identify possible discrepancies and come up with contingency plans to address them really paid off, and looks like we accomplished a very clean data migration there. So that's a huge accomplishment, perhaps the biggest milestone that we set out to achieve. And as of today, we have an actual platform. We've got tens of thousands of consumers and many hundreds of agents, brokers, navigators, and CACs in the system ready to go. Okay, So, and I want to pause there for a second and see if there are any questions regarding the data migration. I know this is something we've been talking about for many months, but you know, we want to make sure that we're not glossing over any important details that may be of concern to carriers. So I'm going to pause just for a second. Feel free to jump in either with a question by voice or by chat. All right. Hearing nothing and seeing nothing, I'm going to move on, but please feel free to type up a question by chat and submit it, and I'll circle back later in the presentation if necessary. Next, we wanted to give you a quick update on the issuer agreement. This is the annual agreement that we need to have you sign and return to us so that we can release all your plans out to the public. These agreements were distributed to carriers on September 5th. I believe Jamie Sawyer sent those out. And the signed agreements are due back to the exchange via email no later than September 20th, after which SSHIX will countersign and return the final version, return a copy of the final version to you. And we do understand, oh, sorry. Let me see here. It looks like we have a question regarding the issuer agreement here. So the question is, and Jamie Sawyer, if you're on the line, I'm going to ask you if you can please jump in and help with this one. The question is, will there be red lines sent out to see any changes made between the last draft version we reviewed and this draft version? In other words, Jamie, the changes that were made as a result, if I'm understanding the question correctly, the changes that were made as a result of carrier feedback, have those been annotated in any way, or do we have a separate version perhaps with change tracking enabled so that it's easy for carriers to see exactly what changed? I know it's kind of a lengthy document. Jamie, do you have any light to shed on that?
Hey, this is Jamie. Yes, we actually did not receive any feedback on the draft versions that we sent back in June. There were small edits made to those documents, more along the lines of formatting, but I'd be happy to get a red line version out if requested by the carriers.
Okay, so it sounds like the changes were minimal, but to the person who just submitted that question, if that is of interest to you, getting a red line version, if you wouldn't mind sending an email to directly, I think that would be very helpful, and I'm sure she'd be able to get that out to you. It just sounds like we don't have that ready immediately right now, so prefer to provide that on demand if that is of interest, rather than going to the trouble of putting that up there just in case nobody's And did someone on the line have a question? Sounds like we got a person or two off of mute. If you could please mute your phones unless you have any questions, we'd be grateful. We are, as always, recording these presentations so that you can refer back to them later, and it really helps to keep the audio clean if everybody's on. Okay, thank you very much. Still hearing some chatter in the background. If you all could please check your phones and make sure you're on, we'd appreciate it. Okay, so it looks like hopefully we addressed that question, but if we did not address that question appropriately, please send us a follow-up or feel free to contact Jamie directly by email. Moving on with the presentation, the receipt of issuer agreements, the reason we do this and have you guys sign this to us is that is the last control gate in our process flow, which is detailed in the plan certification guide that we released back in, I believe, at the beginning of either in late June or early July. This is going to allow us to issue the final certification within the SURF system and get everything locked down in SURF. And then the very last step of the process is we go into the SBE platform and we mark these plans as available to consumers. So first, Jamie goes in and certifies the plans as having met the minimum ACA requirements. And then you all have been working very hard for the last month or so to go in and verify the accuracy of the plan data. The last step in the process is for all the plans that have been verified and the plan data has been verified to be accurate. These are now going to be marked as available, which is going to allow consumers to browse these plans during window shopping beginning October 3rd. And of course, those plans, the availability will carry over into open enrollment during October. They can shop anonymously, but they can't actually submit any enrollments. But once OEP begins on November 1st, all available health and dental plans will be candidates for elective enrollment by consumers. And as always, if you have any particular questions regarding the issuer agreement, please feel free to contact Janie Sawyer directly by email. Her email address is up on the slide. We will, of course, as we always do, post these slides to our website, and I'll send out an email reminder just to do a reply all to this meeting invite to let you know that it's up there. And then all the email addresses and all the hyperlinks in these slides are clickable links. So if you don't have these addresses on hand already, you can use this slide deck as reference. All right. So next is just a very quick update on EDI test scenario 16. We've been talking about this one for a while now, but I'm happy to report that yesterday, last night, I believe late last night, GetInsured delivered EDI test files for scenario 16 to carriers' SFTP repositories. These are the SFTP repositories that we've been using for EDI testing thus far. So each of you should have an EDI test file waiting in your repository. However, due to the availability of the test environment, we had a few carriers who are just completing their EDI testing of scenarios 1 through 15, and that we were hoping to have that wrapped up last week, but that dragged a bit into this week. But we were hoping that would be okay with you all, because we know that at least a number of you had requested a few days to look over the payload to see if you have any questions and make sure that you're able to consume it effectively. So the testing, while we had reported previously that it was scheduled to begin yesterday on the 9th, the test environment isn't going to be available until, I believe, tomorrow on the 11th. So either Steve Austin or Earl Smith, or perhaps both, will be contacting carriers with further instructions as soon as the environment is available. This one is pretty straightforward in terms of the methodology versus some of the more complex EDI scenarios. But again, the test files are up there waiting for you right now. So if you could please take a look at those, get in there as soon as possible, pull those down, take a look at them, make sure that you're able to consume them successfully. That'll give you a bit of a head start. And then we have scheduled time through the end of next week to complete the actual EDI test scenario, and for you to send us back the acknowledgement and confirmation there. So any questions regarding EDI test scenario 16 before I move on? I know that's not a lot of news there, but again, the scope is limited and it's a pretty straightforward test item. The main thing we wanted to give you an update on was the availability of the test environment and the availability of the test file. So any questions before we move on? All right, again, hearing nothing, seeing nothing, I'm going to go ahead and move on, but please feel free to type up a question submitted by chat, or you can always submit your questions to myself or Eric Watt by email using the contact information that we provided. Next, quick update on payment redirect testing, which is scheduled to begin later this month on the 23rd. So not much, direct activity happening related to this testing effort, but in our last monthly presentation, we had asked carriers if they could please do 3 things by the 30th of August. The first is to register the security certificates that we had provided. The second was to whitelist the IP addresses that we had provided for inbound connection. And lastly, we had asked if carriers could please provide the URL to be used during testing. That is the URL that we're going to be transmitting, that we're going to be linking consumers and transmitting the payload to. And I know a number of carriers have done all 3 of these items. Thank you very much. We're grateful for your assistance. But there are a few outstanding carriers from whom we're still waiting on 1 or more of these activities to be completed. So Steve Austin is going to be reaching out, if he has not already. I know he's been in close contact with you all, and Steve, we're very grateful for that. But for those carriers who have not been able to complete those milestones yet, we need to accomplish some connectivity testing in the meantime. That's what was scheduled between 9/2 and 9/20. We're basically trying to do the legwork, get our ducks in a row, and make sure that we're able to hit the ground running on the 23rd once we start sending you the actual redirect payloads. And in order to accomplish that, we need the security certificates registered, the IP addresses whitelisted, if indeed that's a requirement. I know at least a couple of you have told us that's not going to be required with your systems. And then, of course, we need a URL that we can ping in the meantime to make sure that we are set up for successful testing beginning on the 23rd. Once carriers have completed those milestones, Steve Austin is going to reach out to you and provide a technical document describing the testing methodology. This document, it's basically a slide deck. This document also contains an embedded SAML payload. I think it's encoded as an XML file. It's got the .xml file extension, but it is representative of the format of the SAML payload that is going to be provided through the payment redirects. I know that Steve has provided that to at least a couple of you already, but he's going to be reaching out over the next couple days to make sure that we have accomplished all three of those milestones for each of our carriers, and that you all have that information ahead of time so that you can get a sneak peek at the SAML payload and get a bit more information regarding the actual testing methodology. Again, the methodology is pretty simple. It's fairly limited in scope relative to some of the more complex EDI test scenarios like change reporting, adding an appendant, etc. This is pretty straightforward. There's not that there aren't multi-step test scenarios here, but again, we want to make sure that we're set up for success and that we have the certificates registered and the IP addresses whitelisted, etc. So we will be contacting carriers on an individual basis, and once we have those three milestones accomplished, we'll provide that information to you, the testing methodology as well as the sample payload. And again, if you have any questions about any EDI testing, if you have been communicating with Steve Austin, he is a great person to contact directly. He is the master of all things related to our EDI testing. If you've been in contact with Earl Smith, please feel free to contact him directly. He is a tremendously valuable resource at Get Insured. So between the two of them, they are the best contacts, but if you want to send an email to Eric or I, if that's easier, or if you don't have those email addresses, whoever you send it to will get you pointed in the right direction and get you an answer just as quickly as we can. Next, I wanted to discuss the data migration report, which we owe all of you. We had previously, excuse me, just wetting my whistle here. We had previously indicated to carriers that we were going to try and deliver this report by the end of August. We knew that it was going to take us some time to get the report together, owing to perhaps some discrepancies that we had not that we were not anticipating, and that's exactly what happened. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the migration was overwhelmingly successful, but a very, very small number of anomalies were discovered during our post-migration analysis, and these were different from any anomalies that we saw in the test data that we had received back in April and May, and therefore these were unanticipated. Now, part of the reason why we gave ourselves 2 weeks at the end of August to complete the migration and the redesignation process with enrollment professionals is because we were anticipating that we would find things that we hadn't seen before. That was exactly the case. So there were two categories, and the number is very limited. I mean, given that we had, I think we had 61,000 individuals representing somewhere on the order of 40,000 households, and of that number, only 51 households were discovered to have separate applications associated with their health and dental policies. So that means they had application A was associated with a health plan, and application B, they had gone back online, resubmitted a different application, and they had enrolled in a dental plan based upon that second application. Now, I alluded earlier in the presentation to the fact that the Get Insured platform does not allow two simultaneous active applications. I mentioned that in relation to the two consumer complaints we had received. The consumers were unable to submit their codes because they had two separate applications. So I believe we have a solution in place, and I believe the same solution that was used for those two consumers will allow us to address these 51 households. But I wanted to mention these up front because in the data migration report, because these households have not yet been imported into the platform pending the solution that we've been developing to get both enrollments, health, and dental wired up to the same application, because that solution had not yet presented itself, we held off on activating those accounts in the platform. So these particular consumers have not yet received their email or print mail invitations. In addition to that, we are handling them separately than the consumers who were imported successfully with respect to how we're organizing the data migration report. The plan for the data migration report is to have 3 separate tabs in an Excel spreadsheet. The first tab is going to list all of your consumers who were migrated successfully without incident, whose accounts are active in the platform, and to whom invitations have been sent either by email and or print mail. If your particular carrier organization has any one of these 51 households enrolled with you, where we have 2 separate applications, one for health and one for dental, we're going to include those on the second tab of the report. Now, I did want to mention in particular that no direct action is required from carriers. It's just that the queries that we're using to develop to build these reports, we need a separate query for this population for the 51 households with duplicate enrollments. Then that query is different from the query that was used to identify all of the happy paths, so to speak, consumers who were migrated and imported without incident. So tab 1 is going to have all your successful enrollments. Tab 2 is going to have the enrollments which are pending activation while we work on implementing the solution that's going to allow us to resolve these 2 separate applications. And then the only legitimate discrepancies, which again, these were not a result of invalid data or anything like that, but we were anticipating all along that we may discover consumers, as we did in the test data, who had multiple active enrollments. These are simultaneous enrollments, literally 2 QHPs, possibly 2 dental plans that appear to be providing coverage at exactly the same time. Now, we've looked at these 7 households. Again, this is 7 out of 40,000 some households. And we believe that in each case, this is the result of ongoing or incomplete reconciliation activities. So perhaps there was a change reported that required a termination and the activation of a new policy, something along those lines. And so I think we've mentioned for the last couple months that we may be enlisting the help of carriers to help us resolve issues like this that are resulting from the data migration. Again, we saw a couple months back, we had CMS run some queries. They identified duplicate enrollments in production. So we knew that this issue was going to be coming at us. We just didn't know exactly how many there are going to be. Now, I, for one, am greatly relieved that there were only 7 households. I think that's a pretty tremendous accomplishment, given that CMS was trying to help us reconcile these duplicate enrollments over the last couple months. They were able to address the vast majority of them that we identified back in May and June, and so we're still just left with these 7 households. Now, if your carrier organization has enrollments for 1 or more of these 7 households, there's going to be a 3rd tab on your report, including these households. And so you're going to see 2 line items per household representing the 2 different policies that this household appears to be enrolled in. Where we could really use your help is in identifying which of these enrollments, which of the policies is the valid policy that should be treated as the current active enrollment, and which is the invalid enrollment that should be discarded. So this could be considered like a pseudo-reconciliation activity. So we will be providing these reports to you by 9/12, by Thursday, and the report will be delivered to the SFTP repository that you're using for EDI testing. I'm just working on coordinating that with Earl's team right now. I don't have direct access to those SFTP repositories. Given the amount of sensitive information in these reports, I didn't want to send out a password-protected zip file or some other means of transmitting this information by email. So, while we did intend to have these out yesterday as soon as the reports were available, I appreciate your patience while we're working on a more secure solution for transmitting these reports to you. But again, if applicable, in addition to the first tab, which lists all the consumers that were successfully migrated without issue, you may have a 2nd or a 3rd tab in your report if these households with duplicate applications or the households with the duplicate enrollments apply to policies that your carrier organization administers. And I'm going to pause for a moment here. I see we have a question by chat, so let me go address this. Will these reports include whether the members consented for automatic renewals? No, this version of the report does not include whether the members consented for automatic renewals because consumers have the ability to change their consent during the month of September. If they had not provided the consent previously, then they will have the opportunity to do so during the month of September, which can skew, obviously, the results of these reports. Our plan for the next report that we are going to do after the October 1st catch-up file is to include that information on the October 1st report, which will actually be several days after October 1st. It'll probably be later that week. We understand that carriers have messaging requirements related to consumers who either are or are not set up for auto renewal. So our plan was to provide that information at the beginning of October so that you all would be able to identify several weeks in advance of open enrollment who had provided consent for auto renewal and who had not as of that date. Again, I think we had mentioned this in previous presentations, but October 15th is the date upon which we are going to begin processing that auto renewal job. I believe October 11th is the last date on which consumers will have the opportunity to change that consent. So given that time lag, there is a possibility that some consumers may provide additional consent between October 1st and October 11th or so. We had to do the best we can and figure out a date on which to generate that report. But again, given the substantial amount of flux that we anticipate in September in terms of new consumers providing consent who had not provided it before, we do not have that particular data element on the report that we're going to send out this week. Okay, and of course, if anyone has any follow-up questions about the reports, those will be coming your way within the next day or two. We're going to try and get those out tomorrow, but it shouldn't be any later than Thursday. Please feel free to contact us with any questions you have, and in particular for those carriers who are impacted by these 7 households with duplicate enrollments, we're going to be contacting you directly to work through those and make sure that we know exactly which enrollments are the right ones. Our goal is to get all this resolved within the next few weeks so that well in advance of the auto renewal job, which again is scheduled for October 15th, we will have all of these discrepancies resolved, and any consumers who would be eligible for auto renewal will be able to be included in that job by October 15th. Okay, and I wanted to finish off today's presentation with a brief discussion on our carrier connector system. This information is going to look pretty familiar to a number of carriers. I know we've sat down with some of you over the last couple of weeks to discuss our proposal and to solicit some feedback from you regarding a wish list or pain points or whatever as regards to the HIX system that you're using today. Those conversations were very valuable. They were very much appreciated, and I believe that we are headed into our implementation process, our development and implementation process, with a much better understanding of what your needs are. But I know that there were a few carriers, dental carriers in particular, whom we may not have met with yet to present this. So we just wanted to provide a high-level overview for everyone, including personnel from our health carriers who may not have had the opportunity to participate in those meetings. So I'm going to move through it much more quickly than we did in the deep dives that we've done over the past few weeks. But again, this is for the benefit of all carriers, and if anyone has any particular questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to follow up in more detail. So for those of you who may not be aware, the HIX system, the Health Information Casework System, is a proprietary application that CMS had developed, and it is used primarily for the collaborative investigation and resolution of consumer complaints that are identified through the healthcare.gov call center. So the primary means by which an issue in HIX gets created is that a consumer calls the call center, they have a complaint, call center identifies, hey, maybe this requires some collaboration with insurance carriers, maybe it's an eligibility issue, maybe it's related to an effectuation or termination date, that sort of thing, and we want to recruit some assistance from a carrier to get to the bottom of what happened. Call center employee creates an issue in the HIX system, and then the carrier is able to see the information that was logged, identify the individual in question, and use the HIX system to exchange notes and work collaboratively towards the resolution of the investigation. So we are aiming to do largely the same thing, but we also want to add to that functionality that will support the monthly reconciliation process, and I'll talk a bit more about that in just a moment here. So let's see here. So I've kind of covered most of these points here, but just to make it explicit here, part of the transition requires the development of a collaborative case management system modeled after the HIX application. And we're referring to this system as Carrier Connector. And as I mentioned, in addition to consumer complaint resolution, we want to use this to support the reconciliation process. And the platform that we're using for this is Salesforce. It's specifically the Salesforce Enterprise Service Cloud. That's going to serve as the foundation of our casework system. There were a number of reasons why we chose Salesforce. It is a very expensive platform, but we get a robust set of features out of the box, including industry-leading uptime, as well as substantial privacy and security safeguards that we get right out of the box. There is role-based security. There is optional two-factor authentication baked in right out of the box. And because Salesforce's bread and butter is customer relations management, and because customer relations management entails the storage of a lot of PII, we get compliance right out of the gate that we might have to work at otherwise if we chose a less sophisticated and less mature competitor. In addition to that, the framework allows for us to build some fairly robust applications and to take advantage of a lot of built-in functionality, including workflow automation, triggered notifications, without having to write a lot of code, and most importantly, without having to depend on a vendor to support this product. So we are anticipating the ability to support this on an ongoing basis and to implement changes ourselves, again, without being beholden to a contractor as our requirements change over the next several years, and in particular over the next several months as we work with our carriers to refine and tune this system to meet your needs and hopefully make life a lot easier and make our reconciliation and casework complaint resolution processes a lot more efficient. So I wanted to talk briefly about the different roles that we are defining for this casework system. And so I'll talk first about monthly reconciliation. Now, we understand that reconciliation is not the focus nor even a provided function of the HIX system. However, it seemed to us that there was a fairly significant amount of overlap in functionality, and in particular, we heard from a number of carriers that they were frustrated by the lack of ease in incorporating reconciliation type investigation or investigation from reconciliation personnel into the casework and consumer complaint resolution process. So we believe that putting both of these workflows under a single umbrella within a single system will greatly ease the task of incorporating reconciliation personnel, reconciliation type investigation activities into the casework and consumer complaint resolution process. But beginning with reconciliation, so each month, as I'm sure you know, you send enrollment data to the exchange for the reconciliation system comparison and identify discrepancies. SSHIX intends to communicate, coordinate, and resolve discrepancies with carriers using the Carrier Connector system, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about how we intend to do that on the next slide. In addition to that, we have a casework role. SSHIX is going to receive consumer complaints issues through the Consumer Assistance Center, and if our call center personnel identify that a particular issue has the potential to require collaboration from a carrier, then they will assign that to what we're calling our Tier 3 work group, so that our SSHIX personnel, our staff personnel here in our Carson City offices, can then claim those tickets and review them to see whether or not they rise to the level of requiring a ticket to be created in this Carrier Connector system. So the Tier 3 personnel at SSHIX, we're going to kind of serve as triage to figure out which of these tickets can be resolved internally versus which ones need to be, at a minimum, brought to the attention of carriers, if not having carriers actively involved in the investigation and resolution process. So these are two separate user roles that we are implementing for this platform, but there's absolutely no reason why a single individual within your carrier organization can't have both of these roles assigned to them. So for our smaller carriers, if you have smaller reconciliation teams, if you have a small number of enrollments on our platform, and this is manageable for one or two individuals within your organization to handle, you can have access to both roles, and through the reconciliation portal, you'll see the issues that are created as a result of the discrepancy report that gets generated by the platform, and if you have the casework role, you will have access to consumer complaints that are created by way of our call center. And so I mentioned before that one of the reasons why we wanted to put all of this functionality within a single system is to ease the process of incorporating reconciliation personnel or reconciliation-like investigation activities into the consumer complaint process. So we kind of have the Venn diagram here has kind of two different types of issues. On the left, we have carrier connector cases. These are the consumer complaints, that sort of thing. And then we have the carrier connector recon issues on the right-hand side. And there are some fundamental differences in the way that we are designing these data objects that represent either the casework, the consumer complaint cases, or the recon issues. So I'll start with the carrier connector cases. These are the consumer complaints. These are going to be created manually by SSHIX. Again, upon review of these escalated cases that are escalated by the call center, we're going to determine which of them require interaction with carriers, and then we will input those cases on an ad hoc basis as the tickets are reviewed as they come in from the call center. That'll be a daily activity. We understand that timeliness is of the utmost importance with these types of cases, given that they have timeliness requirements for resolution, I believe it's either 72 hours or 15 days. And so this will be a daily cadence for us to come in first thing in the morning, review the latest issues from the call center, and then assign them out to carrier organizations as required. And then, as you may be aware from the HIX system, this is a convention in the HIX system, but it's also a federal requirement that we assign 2 levels of timeliness requirement, one of 2 levels of timeliness requirements to a case, either level 1 or level 2. Level 1 requires resolution within 72 hours, whereas level 2 allows 15 days for the resolution. And one of the biggest complaints, one of the most consistent complaints we heard from carriers with respect to the HIX system is that when changes are made to a case, in particular, changes that may impact the deadline or the timeliness requirements. A perfect example would be a case level 2 being changed to a case level 1, which all of a sudden means that we have to really hurry up and get this thing resolved a lot more quickly. That there weren't any automated notifications in place to keep the personnel who are assigned to these tickets informed of these changes. So that is something that we get out of the box with Salesforce. We can identify through the automated workflow builder tool that anytime a change is made to certain data fields for a carrier connector case, that either an automated email notification or an automated secure inbox notification through the platform should be generated. And then in addition to that, we also have the possibility of sending chat messages to a carrier personnel if they are online. They can use the chat feature to communicate with our personnel if they're online. So in general, we think this is going to be a very robust way to communicate, to collaborate on these cases, while also staying abreast of any critical changes that may impact your investigative activities on your end, including but not limited to changes regarding the timeliness requirements. On the other side of the house, we have carrier connector reconciliation issues. Now, the model that we are proposing is that we would create these issues via bulk import of the discrepancy report that we generate each month. So you all send us the reconciliation inbound or the RCNI file. We bounce that off of our database. There are certain types of issues that can be reconciled automatically. For instance, effectuations, where we may have missed an 834, but it shows up as being effectuated on the RCNI file. We'll go ahead and mark that policy as effectuated. And so only those discrepancies which cannot be handled automatically and which require some type of interaction with carriers are going to come out the other end on the discrepancy report. Our plan is to take that discrepancy report in tabular format and spreadsheet format and import that automatically, do a bulk import into this carrier connector tool. That will allow us to hit the ground running with all of our reconciliation issues organized into the system. And just a little bit more detail on that bulk import. One of the features we're looking at is the ability to group related line items on the reconciliation report. So if we have a discrepancy that impacts multiple members of a single household, and those individual members of that household are represented by multiple individual line items on the discrepancy report, we're looking at logic that will be able to group those multiple line items into a single discrepancy issue, not only to reduce the number of overall discrepancies, but also to make sure that we are working these issues in the most efficient means possible, so that we can see all of the issues that impact a single household, for instance, in a given monthly cycle, without having to resolve one issue as we're working our way down the list, only to, a couple days later get down to another issue that we realized had some bearing on the previous reconciliation activities. And then once these issues get created, we have to figure out how to assign them and whether or not we want to implement some type of automatic assignment. Now, it did occur to us as we were kind of thinking through how this might work that the carriers are the source of truth for effectuations and payment history, and that the exchange is the source of truth for demographic data, household composition, any change reporting, contact information in particular, phone numbers, addresses, that sort of thing. So it occurred to us that it may be a good idea to assume that any discrepancies that are to do with payment history or effectuation status are more than likely to be the result of us having missed an 834 on our end. So we were proposing that we would assign those types of issues to the SSHIX recon team by default. On the other hand, discrepancies that are related to a mismatch of addresses or phone numbers, contact information, household composition, that sort of thing, because we are the source of truth and because we are asking carriers to direct consumers who call and want to change that information on your end, that they need to do that through our call center, the assumption is that this is something that needs to be resolved and changed on the carrier side because the most likely scenario is going to be that a consumer came and reported a change to the SBE platform, but the carriers maybe missed an 834 to get the update on their end. So again, at a high level, that was kind of our proposal, and when we get a little closer to actually having something designed that we can show you, we'll show you a bit more how that works. But we were hoping that we could have a single automated process that'll do a bulk import of the spreadsheet, the discrepancy report, group related issues into a single item, a single issue within the system. And then by default would assign discrepancies based upon the criteria I just described either to the carrier's recon team or to SSHIX's recon team. From there, carriers can assign recon issues internally to specific individuals within your organization as required. And if carriers believe that, hey, this isn't our discrepancy, you assigned it to us, but it's really something that needs to be changed on the exchange side, they will have the ability to easily dispute these individual discrepancy issues from within the system. That will automatically assign these issues to the SSHIX recon team's workflow queue so that we can resolve on our end or perhaps communicate back and forth using comments and notes that are built into the platform. So we're hoping that that will be an improvement on your existing workflow. And then in the middle of the Venn diagram here, perhaps the most important improvement that we're trying to achieve here over the HIX system is the ability to assign carrier connector cases, that is consumer complaints, to recon personnel if further investigation is required. So that's going to allow these cases to show up in the work group queues over on the reconciliation side of the house, and perhaps even to be assigned to specific individuals within either the SSHIX recon team or the carrier's recon team. So if one of your consumer complaint caseworkers decides, hey, I could really use some help from our recon team, they'll be able to do that internally to request assistance from your internal recon team. They can request assistance from our recon team, and similarly, our caseworkers can request assistance from either recon team if required. And of course, we can wire up automated workflow notifications, email notifications, inbox notifications, that sort of thing, to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks, particularly for those cases that are level 1 and require the most rapid resolution. And then the last slide that I had, again, this is just a high-level overview, but we're happy to dive into more detail if anyone would like to set up a meeting. We are let's see, we're already through the first 2 bullet points of our timeline. We did some requirements gathering at the beginning of August so that we could understand exactly how the HIX system is storing and managing these cases. We then took our baseline understanding of those requirements and had some meetings with our QHP carriers over the last couple of weeks where we discussed our proposed design and also solicited feedback on existing HIX functionality and any pain points or features that you wished we could change. And we are now in the design and development phase where we are actually implementing the user roles I described, the role-based permissions. We are developing these data objects that are going to represent consumer complaints as well as reconciliation issues. And we are working on the script, the import script and import logic for the bulk import of the discrepancy report. And we are hoping to roll out around the first week in October, something that you all can actually play with on your end. We want to very much to involve carriers with the UAT process. And we are anticipating that we will have at least a few weeks available to us in October to allow you to play around with this. And then again, because we're going to be self-sufficient in-house, we're going to have the ability to be hopefully very responsive in terms of addressing any required or requested changes. And then, of course, carriers will be involved in an ongoing process to revise and improve these systems. So we may not be able to get to everything that you wish we had in there by November 1st. We are being careful to limit the scope of what we're trying to achieve to the bare essentials with some bells and whistles, the workflow automation, et cetera. But we want to make sure that we are setting realistic goals that we can achieve so that we have a functional system that can support our needs beginning November 1st. We are committed, however, to ongoing support, and we intend to be tinkering with this thing at least through the first few months of next year so that we can really optimize the efficiency and optimize the automation of both the consumer complaint resolution and, in particular, improve the automation of the monthly reconciliation process. And so, as I mentioned a few moments ago, we met with our QHP carriers. We have not had a chance yet to meet with our dental carriers, but if anyone out there wants to schedule a one-on-one meeting to discuss this carrier connector platform in further detail, please feel free to reach out to Heather Korbulik, our Executive Director, contact her by email, and request a one-on-one meeting. We will be more than happy to sit down and talk with you in more detail. We also have some detailed flow charts for the workflow regarding how consumer complaint gets escalated from the call center to the carrier connector system, as well as a more detailed process flow related to the reconciliation discrepancy report and the proposed process for the bulk import. And with that, we've reached the end of the slides that I have. Wow, we used almost the whole hour today. Thank you all for staying with us throughout this hour here. I hope you're as pleased with the accomplishments over the last month as I am. And if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them by email to Eric Watt. I'm more than happy. We have a few minutes left. I'll entertain any questions by voice or by chat right now. So we'll give you just a few minutes before we conclude to type up a question or to submit one by voice. And again, thank you very much for your time, as always. That's like we're dropping like flies. So I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. I will send out an email update when the agenda and the slides have been posted and when the video recording is available. Thanks, as always, for help. You know what? We do have one more question by chat. All right, so we did have one more question by chat here. Has a date been determined yet for receiving renewals? When are we going to send out, if I'm interpreting that correctly, when are we going to send out the renewal transactions following the auto renewal job? I don't have an exact date here. I believe that's going to be around October 25th, but I have your name here on the chat, and I'm going to look into that and see if I can get you a specific date. Now, I don't know that they're all going to come on one particular day. I know that the renewal batch job is going to be staged in phases beginning October 15th and continuing, I believe, through October 24th. But let me see, Rhett, if I can get some more specificity there and provide you with a more detailed response.
All righty. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks, Red. Thanks, everyone else, for joining us. I'm going to hang out for just another minute in case anyone else has any questions. Again, either by chat or by voice, please feel free to send them our way. If you'd prefer, you can, of course, always send an email to Eric, and regardless of what the question is or who needs to answer it, we'll get you pointed in the right direction. All All right, well, I'm not seeing anything, I'm not hearing anything, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up and stop the recording. Thanks again, everyone, for your time. We're very excited about the progress we made in the last month and the activities we got lined up for the next couple months. So we will chat with you again next month, and we will, of course, be in contact, in particular with your EDI test teams, actively throughout the month of September. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you next month.